right, we're so excited today to have Sam Nestory talk about overwintering insects. She took a little reconnaissance walk around the nursery and found a few things, so enjoy.
Thanks, Julie.
Thank you.
Hi everyone, like Julie said, my name is Sam Nestory. I live here in media, so I'm a media resident. I've worked with Julie and with Lisa a little bit on their IPM program, so if they've got questions about insects in the nursery, I get a call, I get photos, I love it, I love to help out. So today I want to talk to you all about how we can support wildlife in the winter. So winter is typically a time we don't think about insects or wildlife generally because everything's much quieter, but it is one of the most important parts of their life cycles because if they don't survive the winter, they're not going to survive, right? It is the harshest time for them to have to deal with. And so when we talk about what our insects and what our species of wildlife do over the winter, there's a few things that we need to take into consideration. So things that will determine how they go about surviving winter. First and foremost is their body size. That's actually a really important thing. This specifically goes for endothermic animals, which I'll talk about in just a sec, but specifically for animals that create their own body heat, that's endothermy or endothermic. If they are a small animal, there's more surface area per volume, right? So you compare a mouse to a fox. A fox can create a lot more heat and they don't lose as much of it because they've got more volume. But a mouse, much smaller, a lot more surface area per volume, so they lose the heat a lot quicker. Then we've got ectothermic animals. If endothermy is they create their own heat, what do we think ectothermic is?
Get their heat from the environment?
Correct, yeah, they rely on the environment to regulate their body temperatures. So I'm sure a lot of us can think of some ectothermic animals. Anyone?
Iguanas.
Iguanas, very nice. Iguanas are part of a larger group called reptiles. Amphibians are also ectothermic. And my personal favorite group of animals, insects, are ectothermic. Endothermic animals, go ahead and shout them out.
Birds.
Birds, very nice.
Mammals,
very nice. And that, of course, means humans as well. So that is a really important, those are two important things when we consider an animal's strategy for overwintering, is are they ectothermic or endothermic, and what is their body size? Third really important thing is what do they eat? What do they need in order to survive? Because, for instance, many birds and, for instance, fox, they can be a little bit more adaptable, right? So they can eat seeds or they can eat berries. And foxes can also eat lots of different things like mice and meat as well. Sometimes they'll even scavenge our trash. So they're very adaptable. There's other things that are not as adaptable. They only eat specific things. For instance, some caterpillars can only eat the leaves of certain plants. So that doesn't allow them a lot of flexibility. So those are the three main things to consider when we talk about overwintering strategies. So one overwintering strategy, I don't know if you can really call it an overwintering strategy because it's just let's get out of Dodge, right? That's migration. Let's not even do winter. I wish I could do that. It's a little cold in the winter here, but can anyone think of an animal that migrates?
birds.
Birds, yes, but not all birds. Some birds. Yeah, so birds are usually the animal that we think of when we think about migration. Now, migration's really interesting because, yes, you don't have to spend the winter in a cold place, so you save a lot of energy and resources by doing that. But migration itself is a very dangerous thing to do. They need a lot of resources in order to migrate. And so we need to think about that when we're talking about supporting insects and wildlife in winter. While they don't stay here during the winter, we can still help them get to where they spend the winter. So in addition to birds, there's neotropical migrant birds. Those are the ones that fly from here all the way down to Central America, South America. Those are thousands and thousands of mile journeys. We also have North American migrants. So those are birds where Canada in the summertime is beautiful, and they come down here, and this is their winter vacation, right? This is warm compared to Canada in the winter. Maybe not for us, but there's lots of birds that move down here for the winter. Can anyone think of birds that you start seeing in the wintertime down here? Juncos, yeah, that's a North American migrant. White-throated sparrows with their really beautiful winter song. I'm sure there's others, and they're just not coming to my brain right now, but when I think of them, I will let you know. So those are North American migrants. But we have more than just birds that migrate, right? Monarchs migrate. They're an insect that migrates from North America all the way down, well, from, the United States all the way down to the boreal forests of Mexico, which is crazy. So monarchs have a 4-generation life cycle. So we see them usually in July and August, right? So what happens is monarchs spend the winter in Mexico. It is chilly there in the boreal forests. Boreal means in the mountainous regions, but it's nice and humid so they don't dry out, and they can all be together, so that does actually help them survive those kind of frosty mornings. Sometimes they're, covered in a little bit of frost, but it's nice and humid, so it keeps them warm, and it keeps them well moisturized, is what we can say. So in February, in March, those monarchs that spent the winter in Mexico start migrating north. And so one generation flies a few hundred, maybe 1,000 miles, then they lay their eggs on milkweed, right? The caterpillars hatch, they eat that milkweed, they turn into adults, they move even further north. We generally see the 2nd generation and the 3rd generation in our area, but they'll go all the way up into southern Canada. So lay eggs, 2nd generation, adults move further north, 3rd generation, adults lay eggs, 4th generation. So that last generation, they're caterpillars, they eat milkweed, they emerge as adults, but they stop there. They don't, all of those other generations live 4, maybe 5 weeks. They mate, they lay eggs, that's what they do. That last generation, that 4th generation, goes into what's called reproductive diapause. So they're like, nope, mating's not what I need to do right now. What I need to do is migrate down to Mexico. And this generation of monarchs lives for 9 to 10 months. Very different than the 4 to 5 weeks. Crazy, right? And so when we talk about supporting monarchs and other migrating insects and wildlife, it's really important for us to do a few things. First of all, we need to plant high quality nectar plants that bloom in the fall. Because we think about monarchs and milkweed all the time, right? The caterpillars can only eat milkweed, they need milkweed, but they can't get where they need to go for the winter without asters, goldenrods, and native sunflowers. Those are 3 really important groups of native plants that have high quality nectar and are going to support those monarchs as they fly south. And there are other butterflies that migrate as well. Most of them don't migrate that far, but they'll migrate further south into the United States and even into the northern parts of Mexico. They also need those really high quality plants. And then in terms of supporting birds, we need to plant things that have those early berries, those fall berries. So think about junipers. They have really awesome berries, super high quality, very nutritious, full of really good fats. That's what the birds need as they go into the winter. They need fats. In the spring, when birds are coming back, they need sugar. But when they are migrating in the fall, they need fats. So roses, native roses have really great berries. Like I said, junipers have really great berries. Viburnums have really great berries. Oh my gosh, there's so many I could talk about. But believe it or not, poison ivy has really great berries for birds. That's a native plant. So yes, you don't want it right next to your patio, right? But if you can leave it climbing up a tree in the back, 40 of your yard, that sounds great. So, strategy number 1, don't even think about winter, right? Get out. Migration. Then, when we talk about insects and animals that are actually spending the winter here, when we talk about insects, they can overwinter as eggs, as larvae, as pupae, which is kind of the chrysalis or the cocoon stage, or as adults. And so there's lots of different strategies. The most uncommon one is insects overwintering as adults. That doesn't happen very often. That's because they need to, there's a lot more involved, right? When we talk about eggs and we talk about pupa, they're already kind of these frozen phases, right? Think about humans. We can freeze our eggs, right? That's the same thing with insects. It doesn't cost a lot of energy for them to kind of stay in that frozen state over the winter. But larvae and adults, a little bit different. So adults, an example is the mourning cloak butterfly. Has anyone heard of the mourning cloak? Oh, they're gorgeous. Mourning as in sad, not mourning as in sunrise. They're really, really cool. So they're one of the first butterflies that we see in the springtime, and that's because they overwinter as adults. They live for 10 months. That's a really long time. They're the longest living butterfly that we have in this region. And instead of being really brightly colored like we think a lot of butterflies are, they're pretty drab colored, especially when they fold up their wings. When they fold their wings, they're dead leaf mimics. So when they fold their wings and they sit on the edge of a branch, they look exactly like a dead leaf. And that's because they're flying before all the trees get their leaves. And so with that in mind, they're not feeding, they're not nectaring on flowers. Because if there's no leaves on trees, there's probably no flowers out and about either. So instead of feeding on flowers, they feed on sap. So over the winter, sometimes those winds, they'll break off branches, and then as spring comes along, that sap starts moving in the tree and starts kind of seeping out of those wounds in the tree. They'll feed on that sap. They'll also feed on poop. Ugh. And yet, very important, they'll also feed on carrion. Anyone know what that is? Yeah, dead animals. So they're using all of these alternative sources of nutritious liquid because they're not active when the flowers are active. That's one of my favorites that overwinters as an adult.
So
yeah.
When it's cold, they can still move around?
So when it's cold, what happens is they inject something called glycol into their bodies, which is the equivalent of antifreeze. So they'll find, and it's really important here too, for us to plant plants that have, specifically trees, that have rough bark. Because what they'll do is they'll find a little niche under a bark crevice or something like that for them to spend that winter. So shagbark hickories, one of the best plants we can plant for beauty. They're spectacular. Their fall color is gorgeous. And for wildlife, they have these really incredible nuts, hickory nuts that they produce. And they've got rough, really beautiful peeling bark that provides those spaces not just for butterflies, but for bats and all of these other critters to kind of curl up under. Another alternative for planting a tree that has rough bark and all these crevices for animals is persimmon and hackberry. Hackberry has the craziest bark you've ever seen. It looks like it was 3D printed, truly. I wish I had some on me, but I do not. So that's a really cool plant to plant as well. And those little crevices are really important. Speaking of glycol, that's something that also happens with insects that overwinter as larvae. And so larvae are caterpillars, right? Generally when we're talking about butterflies and moths, those are caterpillars, but beetles have larvae, flies have larvae, lots of other insects have a larval stage. So have you all seen those woolly bears, those fuzzy brown caterpillars crawling across? Yeah. So they're active in like November, right? You might be thinking, what are they doing? A lot of people ask, what are they doing crawling across my sidewalk, my driveway? Okay. What they're doing is they're trying to find a really nice place to spend the winter. And for them, a really nice place to spend the winter is a nice big pile of leaves. this is really important for us as humans because we look out in the woods, plenty of leaves, right? And then you add humans into the mix. For some reason, we do not like leaves anywhere. Not a single leaf to be found. We don't like them. But that really impacts all of our insects and other wildlife because leaves not only provide like a cute little blanket that helps to keep the warmth, but they're actively breaking down in the winter as well. And when you break down something like that, you actually generate heat. So not only are they holding heat, it's generating heat. So it's a really nice place to be over the winter. And so woolly bears are crawling, they're trying to find a nice place to spend that winter. They overwinter as caterpillars, as those fuzzy caterpillars. And again, they inject that glycol into their bloodstream. They don't technically have blood. It's called hemolymph if you want a little vocab word to walk away with today. But they insert glycol into their system, and again, that acts as like an antifreeze. And then
What's that process like? Injecting themselves with glycol?
so it's a different type of sugar that they produce that acts as an antifreeze. So they'll go into a system where instead of
There's
creating
just a chemical reaction within there.
chemical reaction within them. Yeah, they don't find it out in the environment, they
Okay.
create it themselves. Yeah. And so then it warms up in the springtime. They're a caterpillar, they need to do a little bit more growing, so they find some food to eat and then they go into their cocoon and they'll emerge as, anyone know what a woolly bear turns into? Isabella tiger moth. So if you look up a photo, they're these gorgeous rusty orange moths with black spots on them. Really, really pretty. But we tend to see the caterpillar because they really make themselves known. Okay, we've also got the pupal phase, and the pupal phase is cocoons, chrysalises. And when we talk about those phases, that's where a lot of our silk moths and our swallowtail butterflies, that's the phase that they overwinter in. And what swallowtail butterflies will do is they'll go into their cocoon and they'll go on a stem of a tree or a shrub or even sometimes of perennial plants, and they'll use silk to attach themselves to the stem, and so their chrysalis kind of hangs off like this, but it's attached by a thread right here. They're really cool if you can see them. The camouflage is incredible. And then our silk moths also overwinter in cocoons, and their cocoons can look anything like just a leaf wrapped up into a little ball. Again, another example of adding humans and our desire to remove every single leaf from our system really affecting these caterpillars, because out in the woods, holy moly, that's some really great camouflage. Put it into a person's yard, not so much, right? Because we blow it away, we rake it up, we throw it away, or we put it through a mower. They can't survive that process. And then others kind of look like these big paper bags, like this, and you'll often see them in fence posts or in the crook of a tree, something like that. Those are generally our Cecropia moth cocoons, which are gorgeous, huge, beautiful moths. So again, really keeping our leaves is important and being careful when we're pruning. If you see something weird, try and identify it first before you throw it away.
You do? Oh,
Let's see,
awesome.
eggs. Eggs, another really great way that insects overwinter.
Thank you.
One of my favorites is wheel bugs. Anyone know what a wheel bug is? No? They're pretty big, they're about this big, and they're called wheel bugs because it looks like they have half a wheel with all its spokes coming out of the top of its back. They're awesome predators in the garden. They're in the true bug group, so that means they have a straw-like mouth part that they use to and suck all the juices out of their prey. Oof, kind of gross, but also really good for us because they do eat a lot of pests, like spotted lanternfly. But they overwinter as eggs. Their eggs are fairly large for eggs, but they're in perfect hexagons. They're arranged in perfect hexagons on the sides of trees. So if you're going around, and we got a lot of questions about this when the spotted lanternfly was really big here, right? Because people were going out in the winter, they were trying to find these spotted lanternfly eggs, and they'd see these for the first time in their whole life, and they'd say, what the heck is this? Wheelbug eggs. And that one we were like, don't touch, leave them. They're awesome to have in your yard as predators. And then another example is of insects overwintering as eggs.
Praying mantis?
Praying mantis, yes. Anyone know what the egg case for a praying mantis is technically called? It's called an ootheca. Isn't that a fun name? Ootheca. This also applies to cockroaches, but you know, I don't have any cockroach egg sacs on me. So this is a Chinese mantis egg case. And so when we talk about praying mantises, we have 4 species in this region. 3 of them are not native. We only have 1 native species of mantis, and its egg case doesn't look anything like this. So this is the Chinese mantis egg case. You can see it's pretty big. They generally wrap around the backs of perennial stems. They're light tan, and they're squishy like styrofoam. You want to feel it? It's definitely like styrofoam. Isn't that weird? It's like styrofoam. Yeah, right? I promise they're not going to explode out at you.
Those.
Okay, you've collected these. Okay, so it's a little bit of a touchy subject, right? Because this is a non-native species. I will say, we removed them at Stoneleigh. We found last year 350 of these just in our meadow. We have 42 acres just in our meadow, 350. And dozens of mantises come from each of these egg sacs. Our native mantises, we found 5 adults at all over the entire season. And so if removing Chinese mantises from your garden is something you'd like to do, and the reason that people do it, the reason that we do it, is because the Chinese mantis is the largest mantis that we have, 4 to 5 inches long. Our native mantis, 2 inches. So when we think about how much food they need to eat and how many there were, 350 egg cases with dozens of mantises in there. Think about all that they need to eat, and guess what their favorite foods are? Bumblebees and butterflies. People say, oh, I'm keeping them for the spotted lanternflies. They're generalist predators. They're going to eat anything that they can get their hands on. Some people have seen them eat hummingbirds. I'm not saying that that happens often, but they are big enough for that to happen. Isn't that crazy? That's crazy. And so what we like to do is remove them. And guess what? Now is the great time to do so. And then if you have any friends who have chickens, take these, give them to your friends. They'll put them in their coops, and once they emerge, chickens love insects, right? They love insects. And once these hatch, those chickens will take care of those, and they get a nice source of protein. Because we have noticed, once we started removing these egg cases, we did see the numbers of the native mantis increase in the garden, which is awesome. And the native mantis is gorgeous, about 2 inches long. The females are generally, instead of being like green or tan like we see these guys being, they tend to be grayish brown, and they look like they're covered in lichen. And that's because they tend to lay their eggs on tree bark, where these guys are laying their eggs in meadows and grasses.
They don't eat bumblebees and things?
They do. They're still generalist predators, but if we think about their numbers being lower and their body size being smaller, they're not eating as much and not having an inordinate impact on our ecosystems. Some people argue that the Chinese mantis is naturalized. When I look at the numbers, 350 egg cases in one small area, that doesn't feel like naturalized to me. That feels like an invasive species who's out competing a native species. So we're not going to eradicate them on any large scale. On a local scale,
Right.
on your backyard scale, I think you can. They don't move around very well. Have you ever seen a mantis fly? It's embarrassing for them.
Like a turkey.
It is. It's like a turkey flying, but it's an insect. So they're not super great at moving around really quickly where butterflies and bees are. So I personally believe we can have an impact on a local scale. We're never going to get rid of them all. But in your backyard, in your green space, try it out. See if you notice a difference over a few years. We noticed a difference, and the native mantises are just so cool. Just so cool. Yes.
So what does an egg taste for a native?
That's a great question. I was hoping I'd see one on the side of this building. That was something I was hoping. But so instead of wrapping around a stem like this, they're flat. So generally they're on like a tree limb or a trunk of a tree. Sometimes they're on a building. Even on these rocks, I wouldn't be surprised if there was one laid here. So they're flat. They're smaller. I'd say they're about 1/2 inch, 3/4 of an inch long, rectangular, and they're dark brown with a light stripe down the middle. Very different from this round, tan, wrapped around a stem kind of egg case. So I recommend you look up some photos. You really can't get that one and this one mixed up. The European egg case looks a little similar to this. It's also a non-native species, so if you get one of those out of every 10 of these, you're not removing the native species. And again, I tried, I looked, I promise. They're really tough to see. They're not out in the open. They tend to be a lot more secluded against buildings or tree trunks. Has anyone accidentally brought one of these in and it exploded in their kitchen? No? I don't recommend you do that. It is a lot of little baby mantises. It's a lot. Another example of eggs. Now this is not an insect, but it is an arthropod. Has anyone seen these around before? See this kind of string of pearls? See that string of pearls there? So these are orb weaver eggs, which is a type of spider. And so now I can guarantee if you go out into a green space, into your backyard, you'll find some of these. Check your trees and your evergreens. They, for some reason, know that the evergreens keep their leaves so they have increased kind of camouflage, right? Increased protection. So the female creates a web in this general area. She catches all the insects. She gets a lot of protein. She gets all those nutrients. And each one of those pearls is one egg sac. And so this particular female she did pretty good this year. Sometimes you'll see just two pearls in a string. Sometimes you'll see 5, sometimes you'll see 7. She looks like she's got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. She did a good job. Proud of her. And so really, really, again, great predators to have in the garden. I recommend you go and look for these guys when you get back to your garden. See if you can see any. Another way that insects overwinter are in galls. Anyone know what a gall is? This is a gall, a type of gall. So galls are when insects lay eggs in a part of a plant. See that weird round thing on there? I'm not going to cut it open because I would kill whatever's inside, but galls are really cool. So an insect comes to a plant. Usually they're very specific. They only lay eggs in one or a few types of plants. For instance, there's one that only lays eggs in goldenrod stems. Not even in leaves or anything like that, just in goldenrod stems. And here we have an oak specialist. I think that this one is the oak apple gall that you're probably thinking of.
They make ink and stuff out of it.
People do make ink out of them.
Yeah.
People make ink out of galls, which is really, really cool. But oaks have over, I forget what the number is. It might be over like 300 different species of insect gall makers, which is crazy. That's a lot. And so the insect comes along, it lays eggs in the buds or the leaf or the stem. In this case, they laid eggs in the tip of the stem. And the plant, think about it kind of like a virus or a sickness, right? So the plant responds by kind of surrounding it and blocking it off. That's exactly what the gall maker wanted. because now it's got a nice little home. It doesn't affect the health of the plant. Now that gallmaker's got a nice little home. That larva feeds inside of here all year long, and it'll emerge usually next spring, depending on the type of gallmaker. Sometimes they'll emerge in the fall, and then they'll lay eggs in the buds, and then those buds change over the winter as they start to grow. But like I said, there's hundreds and hundreds of species of gallmakers. But when we talk about the types of insects that cause galls, there's a few. There's flies, there's aphids, there's wasps, there's thrips. Lots of different types of insects create galls, and it's really, really cool. People get really freaked out. They're like, oh my God, what's happening to my oak tree? It's fine, let it be, and it ends up you're supporting a really complicated, complex, interesting ecosystem. So I talked a little bit about plant choice, right? So plant those late blooming things that will help those monarchs get down south. The asters, the goldenrods, the sunflowers. Come to Redbud, they've got all these things. It's awesome. Something else you can do is plant those trees that have that rough bark. Shagbark hickories, persimmons, certain types of oaks like white oaks, what did I say, hackberry. And that's going to be great for not just insects, but for bats. Oh, we have 9 species of bats in Pennsylvania, and 6 of them overwinter here. 3 of them migrate. Both of them are going to be using the rough bark of those trees. Not necessarily for overwintering. Our hibernating species of bats are using barns, they're using caves, things like that. But the ones that migrate, they got to spend that cold night somewhere as they're moving south. They love to spend it in the crooks of these trees. Something else we can do to support insects and other wildlife over the winter is keep dead wood in our green spaces and gardens. You have a tree that dies. Can you keep the whole thing? Because that's ideal. If you can't, we understand. You don't want it to fall on your house, right? Can you cut it at 40 feet? Okay, that's still too tall. Can you put it at 30 feet? That's called a snag when you leave a tree standing. Even a snag as tall as 12 feet can help support wildlife. Anyone know some of the birds that utilize...
Woodpeckers.
Yes, woodpeckers. Who doesn't love a woodpecker, right? And some people get frustrated because the woodpeckers are pecking on their homes. That's because we removed all of the trees, all of the dead trees in our ecosystem. So keeping dead trees standing helps woodpeckers, also helps flying squirrels. People get mad about flying squirrels in their attics, right? Who's here has had flying squirrels in their attic? Oh, lucky ducks. Lucky ducks.
Regular squirrels.
Regular squirrels. Well, I can't say anything about them.
Let's not talk
They're
about
just
there.
pesty. But flying squirrels are so cute. Oh my gosh. And they need these kind of cavities in dead wood in order to survive the winter. They don't truly hibernate, but they'll roost together in family groups, and they'll lower their body temperatures, and the radiant heat of each of them kind of keeps them warm. And they do it in family groups, so it also strengthens their familial bonds for the next year. How cute is that? Ugh. So keeping those things. And then again, we've got insects that are going to be breaking down that wood, recycling those nutrients back into the soil, and during the winter, many of them stay in there. What else can we do? Leaves. Oh yeah, well, going back to the dead wood. If you can't keep a snag standing, keep wood out in your garden. Keep a brush pile. You're pruning, throw things onto that brush pile. That's also really great for those birds. All those trees have lost their leaves, right? They need protection from those hawks that are still flying around. They'll go into that little brush pile to find some, speaking of, little mockingbird over here. Utilizing, now this is not a brush pile, but it's a nice, dense collection of vines. This is a beautiful vine called trumpet honeysuckle. This is a really good one. We're talking about migration. Another bird that migrates is ruby-throated hummingbirds. This vine will bloom sometimes, excuse me, well into November. So if there's any late birds coming down, they'll be able to use that nectar. There's also berries, and it creates this dense structure over winter that birds can hide in. Excuse me, that can be replicated with brush piles. Leaves. Now, I know it's really tough to leave leaves sometimes. It really depends on the type of leaf. I have a giant sugar maple in my yard. This is the first year that I've lived in this house, so I'm like, you know what, I'm gonna see what these do. So I let them fall, I didn't do anything with them. They've already crumpled and dried out so much that the biomass is reduced by like 2/3. So now I'm just gonna blow them into my beds. They'll continue to break down over the winter. You can leave them in pretty thick, 5 inches. That'll break down into really nice nutrient dense kind of soil that next year. Oaks are another story, right? Oak leaves take a long time to break down. In the forest, that's great because it protects that soil and it really creates a healthy ecosystem. But that's not always great when we have a small yard and one big old oak tree. As much as you can, leave them intact, not shredded, and blow them into or rake them into some of your beds. If you need to, you can mulch them. The last option is throwing them away. That's something you really want to avoid doing. So in hierarchy of best things for wildlife and for your gardens, number 1 is keep them all as much as you can, intact and whole. Second, mulch them if you have to, so you can run a mower over them. I've seen someone throw them all into like a trash can and then take a string trimmer and just go like a blender. And then, try not to throw them away. If you have to get rid of them somehow, give them to a neighbor. See if anyone else wants those leaves. And again, when we talk about leaving them whole and intact, that's the best way to support the wildlife. Those moths are creating cocoons with that leaf. If you use that string trimmer, it's not going to survive. But again, I understand we can't all keep our leaves whole and intact and where they lie, right? So it's about prioritizing. What else can we do? We can plant plants that also have berries all through the winter. The very aptly named winter berry is one of those. Winter berries are beautiful. They're absolutely spectacular. And there are certain berries that birds don't go to until they've gone through several thaw cycles, because otherwise it's too acidic. Think about persimmons. Has anyone had a persimmon off the tree? Was it the most horrible experience you've ever had?
Inedible.
Inedible. Your whole body feels like it wants to curl in on itself. It's really, 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 it's not even sour. What is it? Just acerbic. It just takes every ounce of moisture out of your mouth. If you want to eat a persimmon, it needs to freeze first, because that jump starts that fermentation process, and then it gets sweet and delicious. And that happens with birds' berries as well. Winterberry, great. Chokeberry, great, which is aronia. That's a really, really great plant. And a lot of these plants also, if they're keeping their berries for this long, that means that they're looking really beautiful too, right? So our perennial beds, right? Look all around. Look at this gorgeous aster. Look at this goldenrod. Keeping this up throughout the winter is really important, not just for birds. We'll see titmice and chickadees and other small little birds feeding on these seeds throughout the winter time, so really great for birds. Also, just having this much biomass, look, under that beautiful aster. Wouldn't that be a great place to hang out if you were a bird or an insect? Also creates these beautiful little microclimates so things can overwinter better. And then also, there are insects that overwinter inside of the stems of our perennial plants. So this one I chose because it's hollow inside. So there could be an insect who would nestle its way in here and spend the winter inside of the stem. So keeping everything standing for as long as you possibly can into early spring next year is the best way to support our insects and wildlife, because they utilize these things. They really need all that stuff, right? We think about when you go out into the woods, no one's going out and cutting down everything. No one's cutting down the meadows in the winter. Well, some people are, but that means that they're being managed by humans. I understand that that's not the look for everybody, or that's, we got to take baby steps sometimes, right? So I've got a couple options. First of all, you can cut some things back, things that are really floppy. Hostas. Nobody's using a hosta. It turns into mush. It's gross. So cut back your hostas. That's fine. Stems that are really important for wildlife are going to be like Joe Pye, goldenrods, asters, sunflowers, things that have those hardy stems that are hollow inside. So keep those, and you can cut back some other things. Another option, there's been some research that has shown insects only utilize the bottom 18 inches of a stem. So if you wanted to, you could experiment with cutting back everything but the 18 inches of stem. And then, you know, you get a little bit of a cleaner look if that's what you're going for. But if we can kind of take these baby steps to ultimately leaving everything, that would be awesome. That also requires some education for our neighbors and for ourselves, but hopefully people find beauty in that. What else can we do? Learn, observe, go out, find those little things in your garden in the winter time. Cool, well thank you all so much.